for me personally, unless you have that community front and centre, I can't call it placemaking. I can call it something else. I can call it public art. I can call it urban design, whichever. But I can't call it placemaking. Let's just see if it works. Let's just give it a go. And from that, wonderful exponential things can happen as well.
The fable of stone soup has been told in countless ways across time and cultures. Sometimes the moral shifts, the protagonists are different. Even the stone in some tellings was a nail or pebbles or even an axe. A common telling is of a conniving traveler tricking a miserly woman into adding ingredients from her kitchen to make him a soup. The telling I remember being told as a child was a story of cooperation, of collaboration. The visitor, starting the soup in his pot from just a stone and water, drew the attention of the townsfolk. Their curiosity drove them to inquiry, and he would explain that stone soup is the best soup imaginable. This pot will be very good, but really good stone soup would just have a little garnish, maybe a carrot and some onion, ultimately a potato or two, and you know the way it's made for a king. Soon the village is all together enjoying the stranger's recipe, perhaps even believing that it was the stranger and his stone and not their own collective ingredients that they all brought to contribute to the pot that made it so delicious. I think that might be a perfect metaphor for placemaking. Those of us who call ourselves placemakers see the pot, and we introduce the stone, the catalyst to bring out the villagers' ingredients. Those ingredients simmer together and combine to create a delicious meal that feeds and nourishes the whole community. And even while the bowls are being enjoyed, the pot still simmers and more ingredients are added. Today's episode has been simmering, at least in my mind, for a long time. Whether the fable of stone soup is an apt way to talk about placemaking or not, Cara Courage has thought quite a bit about how we talk about placemaking, what it is, what it isn't, and why it's important that we continue to ask. She's the co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of Placemaking and more recently, Trauma-Informed Placemaking. In addition to her scholarship, Cara is a practitioner working with people and organizations who want to make culture, heritage, and place matter more and matter to more people. Here's my conversation with Dr. Cara Courage. Well, let's talk about you. If you would just introduce yourself however you would like to be, whatever context you would like to introduce yourself as.
That's not always straightforward because I work independently, so I wear many hats. But I'm Dr. Cara Courage. I work as a culture, communities and place consultant, which is a really wide umbrella, but I'm a practitioner and a scholar working across culture, place, community, and I've been doing that for about 30 years. So I sit between this creative, civic, cultural, policy and development worlds, essentially there to help people have a say in how their place looks, how it functions. That's what I do.
I want to start by talking about placemaking. You have written and studied and thought about placemaking a lot, both as a concept, as a practice, as a art, and as a term. There's a piece that's been circulating, Placemaking is Dead, Long Live Placemaking.
Yeah.
It speaks to a conversation that's been happening a lot in the field about, we come up with these very complex systems, give them a name, and then the name takes on a different meaning and sometimes loses the complex system behind it that the name was meant to. So what is placemaking?
I know, right? I think there's as many understandings or definitions of placemaking as there are placemakers. And part of me thinks that's really, really exciting. But also, I don't think we should forget, we're a relatively young sector or field, a field of practice. So I think actually defining what we do and how we do it is really important. How I voice it is there. It's a process. It's a set of tools to help the community shape their places, to have a say in how it looks, how it functions, so on and so forth. But that's sort of deliberately vague in a way. That's the sort of thing that I try and explain it to my mum if she's asking me, what is it that you do? The word itself that the whole placemaking piece of it is really contested. I think it's absolutely what drew me to placemaking, to think about this term, was that it's really a community-led, community-first practice. And there is, across this placemaking table, it's a really horizontal table of all sorts of different skills and expertises. They all come into play when they're needed, and they step back when they're not. But the community is always there, and the community voice is central to making the decisions about that place. That, for me, is a sort of belt and braces, simple as you like, idea of placemaking. But of course, it's a really contested term. And I started, I thought was going to be just a blog post about 2 years ago, looking at what is it that people are saying placemaking is now. I looked at this in my PhD, that was 10 years ago. We covered many different things of that in the Handbook of Placemaking. That was 5 years ago. Where are we now? Things are changing so fast. And I noticed that some terms had really stuck and some had really changed and developed. So the idea of creative placemaking, that's, again, a phrase, a term that a lot of people will have heard. It comes out of that 2010 white paper that Marcuse and Gadwa did for the NEA, and it's a practice that's anchored by artists, cultural workers. Engagement here is really expressive and collaborative, and that arts piece is going front and centre for this process of placemaking. And then I'm increasingly seeing an institutional type of placemaking. So this is often driven by those cultural anchors of a place, like museums, libraries, council offices, however it may be broken, set up in that particular place. But a lot of sort of policy, public sector stuff going into here. And engagement here, in the main, not always, but tends to be quite consultative, shaped by formal structures, quite top down, goes, does what it says in the tin in terms of the name of it. And there's a lot of sort of public frameworks, public mandates going into that as well. There's a lot of tactical placemaking, that temporary, agile, interventionist, pop-up, poking at something, celebrating something, but it's here and it's gone, and that's absolutely perfect and what it should be doing. And there's developmental placemaking. So this is something that's embedded in regeneration. There's an investment logic going through this. Engagement is framed quite instrumentally, is a very common critique put of it. And there's a lot of sort of stakeholder input or buy-in. And then I'm seeing a lot also of justice-orientated placemaking. And this is this is where I've seen a real turn in it, particularly in the last couple of years. And this is about placemaking as a practice and a process and a means for civil social rights, reparations and resistance. This is about looking at the power structures that are held in a place and decentering them, redistributing them, and including those voices in a place that are historically, that are usually, that are systemically excluded from those place discussions. So that was my kind of, when I was looking at what are people saying about placemaking now, certainly in the Anglophone centres of the world, that's what people were saying that placemaking was about. Lock it into a particular definition, that's another thing completely. But these were the kind of intentions that I was seeing coming through.
So all of that seems to be kind of process-based, but we're also seeing placemaking used as a noun. We're going to do some placemaking here. Certainly that, the process of doing something or the outcomes of doing that is divorced from placemaking, but how detrimental is that to the field of placemaking when placemaking is being used separate from the process of placemaking?
There has been this, there's a short answer to that. It's like, yes, it is detrimental. And there's been a certain amount of co-option of the term placemaking, which can do a lot to kind of give a veneer to a practice that's saying it's placemaking when it actually isn't. And that's certainly where you're getting that critique of developmental or sometimes institutional placemaking as well. Because this is a process of consultation, the community isn't embedded. And it's almost, in some cases that people feel like you've come up with the solution already. Our consultation is absolutely irrelevant in this. And of course, when I've worked with developers who've done really deep community work, and I'd absolutely say that they're placemakers. But there are placemaking schemes out there, which is essentially putting very well designed, but, good urban furniture in there. That just should be good urban design. That doesn't necessarily make it placemaking. And so you have this is why there is such a wide spectrum of what is being called placemaking now. For me personally, unless you have that community front and centre, I can't call it placemaking. I can call it something else. I can call it public art. I can call it urban design, whichever. But I can't call it placemaking. And it can hide a process which is actually, in terms of the community of a place, really extractive.
Mm-hmm.
That flattens dissensus and difference into a consensus. And that makes assumptions about a place, that flattens a story and a history of a place, that excludes people from a place, and on we go.
So let me ask you this, and then we can move off of the development placemaking, but I think it's important. Often in projects in cities and municipal projects, private projects, those who control the resources, the fun, and including the pace of a project, which is not insignificant, are not the people with the lived experience of the place, who are not invested in whether it is the social justice component or the acknowledgement of the trauma that a place exists. How do you have the conversation with people who are separate from the lived experience of a place, but yet maintain or control the resources of development? And I know that's a big question.
It's a really big question. And I think my first response to that is it's really hard to start those conversations. A lot of the communities that I work with have been at the sharp end, the wrong end of a developer-led placemaking. They're the communities that have been over-consulted, that have been listened to and had all of that knowledge extracted, but not seen any of the benefit of that, not been included in that process in a meaningful way. It feels very tokenistic to them. They feel very instrumentalized. And often at the end of it, they'll find that they've been developed out of a place as well. So to just go in and go, hi, I'm a placemaker, let's have a conversation. That is not the way that I approach it. It's because and why would they come in and trust me if I'm saying that? Absolutely, why would they? One of the things that I come into this sector from the arts sector, essentially, from the arts and culture sector. And in that work that I've been doing over the last couple of years, I did drill down into what specifically can this sector, how can it make distinctive contributions to placemaking? How is it doing it? And I mentioned that because that's in part a response to your question. So I work a lot with artists, bringing them into those kind of conversations with communities that are just about to have some consultation or some placemaking done to them. And those artists hold the space in such a particular way. To me, that is an answer to that question. How do you have these conversations with communities? So when you bring artists into placemaking, they have this really special capacity to hold what's remembered in a place, but also opening up about the imagination and what's possible in a place. And they can negotiate this beautiful position between the past and the future through this present moment as well. And so I've seen some somebody's asked me as well, like, what's the magic of a kind of community-led placemaking? And there's something in that. That's the magic of it. It's a piece of the imagination. And there's something which, working in this way, it's in taking this sort of cultural lens into placemaking. There's a reframing of this accountability, and it becomes a relational thing. So placemaking, in this sense, it comes accountable first to the people who actually inhabit a space and who really do the day-to-day shaping of the place. And it's not then accountable to a funder or developer. So it's reshifting that balance of power as well. And it can ask really uncomfortable questions, but it can take people on a process where, you can go into a neighbourhood and the neighbourhood will have the answers to whatever the problems or the questions are of the place. But there'll be hundreds of them. And it will get people along a journey where they do become, a consensus emerges amongst themselves about what they want. And creative means and creative artistic questioning is a really great way to do that. And arts and culture, they operate at this, what I term sort of cultural hinge. And they sit between that community logic on the one side and kind of institutional or planning or whatever policy and frameworks on the other. And they translate between them. And that's a really, really important role for arts and culture in this. Because a lot of this is about expectation and about language, both being used to include and exclude particular actors from a placemaking setting. So my response always first is to never assume that me landing in a place as a placemaker is going to be a good thing. It's never to assume. I assume trust of the community. I don't assume that they trust me, and I have to earn that. And working through creative means is a way to have really expansive, but also really concrete conversations about place. And often a means, not just to surface ideas and so forth, but actually to explain how places work. And like, this is how we can talk to power and really break it down and make it something concrete for that community. And from that, we go in all sorts of different directions.
A lot of your work and scholarship has been around the relationship to place and trauma. And as we're talking about arts and cultural expression and ritual, what is the role that arts and culture plays in healing?
Yeah. I mean, there's a broad spectrum of work here where there's obviously a number of artists, and it's a very, very specific field of working in art therapeutic contexts. And I've seen that applied into various different place contexts as well. Where I often work with it is when an artist is being brought in, or an arts organisation is addressing a particular issue within a place. And that might be drug use, it might be homelessness, it might be isolation. And those artists are the ones that are bringing the community in to be working with those issues in a live sense, and co-authoring, sharing the agency of those particular projects as well. I mean, they're huge and they're varied, but often that arts-led inquiry is the one that can really pinpoint, get to that particular conversation in a particular way that opens up another way of working. This is, is sort of well-versed through the notion of social practice arts, and artists that really sort of, like an Ursula Le Guin phrase, like they stick with the trouble. They work in these spaces of trouble and they work through it in that brilliantly productive and imaginative way.
Kind of formulating a thought about emotion and place. We've talked a lot in the field and on this show about how a place sits in emotion, and I think there's an emotional memory of place that you kind of work with a lot. Tell me about how can a place impact the nervous system? Like what effect does a place have on the nervous system, and why is that important to understand?
Yeah. You're speaking directly to this piece of trauma-informed placemaking that I've sort of developed with a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Kaherl. And it came out of actually our kind of nervous response reaction to the pandemic and seeing this, it's a very specific moment. We were watching this traumatic rupture across the world of this people-place relationship. during the pandemic, and seeing people being cut off from their public space where they're witnessed passively, but they're witnessed. There's a connection to the others around you. And we were seeing obviously also like artwork in the windows and concerts on your balcony and things like that. And that real craving for connection and witness and gathering and togetherness. And that's a nervous, system response to that. There were various different papers that have come out of it that looked at the vagus nerve, looked at fight, flight, freeze, fawn behaviours through the pandemic as well. But of course, we saw this through the place lens. This is happening at the place level. But of course, also 2020 was the year of the Black Lives Matter protests. And at that time, I was bringing the editing of the Handbook of Placemaking together, and I actually delayed it for 6 months because there were a couple of writers there where this protests and the unrest and many instances of police brutality were literally happening on the streets outside where they were writing their chapters. So that had to get included in the book, but it also led to this investigation of thinking about epigenetic trauma. That an experience of trauma in a place at a certain period of time will carry on down through the generations. So again, that's something which is almost kind of tapping into our DNA. So a historic trauma of a place will carry on down through the generations of people that live in that place. And there's a lot of research out there about how the experience of trauma, the impact on your vagus nerve, and what that will do, the stress measures that this will kick off through your body and how you might respond to it in various different ways. And there's an absolute place dimension through that. So this idea of trauma-informed placemaking came from, we've got to really understand as placemakers, we're going into sites of trauma. And that might be the really obvious kind of like capital T trauma of, say, a tsunami. Or it might be going into sites of trauma which are perhaps more hidden and perhaps a little bit more invidious, like that community that's been over-consulted. And they come then with a set of stress reactions to, God, there's news of another development happening in our place. It will set off exactly the same kind of response. And we need to be cognizant of that when we go in to work in place. But of course, the other side of that also is that, our practices as placemakers could also be compounding the trauma, the harm that's been happening in place, the tyranny of the do-gooder. None of us want to go in and create harm, but there can be myriad ways that we can do that without even realising. And then there's another side to this where, of course, placemaking and working through place can be a real site of healing as well. So it's a kind of complex area. It asks us to be accountable and answers of ourselves some very difficult, some difficult questions. But I think we have the capacity to heal within our place work at the same time.
Thinking about the trauma of displacement in a place, and you talk about the generational trauma of a place, there are a lot of examples of places where entire peoples have been displaced, and the people who suffered trauma are no longer there. How does trauma live in a place beyond the people who have the experience of that trauma?
There are 2 chapters in the recent books that we've done on this that really strike to that. And one was talking about a children's home in Australia. And of course, it wasn't a children's home. It's where Aboriginal children were separated from their families and indoctrinated into that white colonial system. And it was being refigured as a hotel. And there were people there saying, actually, the place just feels a bit weird. Something doesn't feel quite right here. And they were picking up on something of the history of this place. But of course, it was built with a certain type of architecture, which was meant to intimidate and control and repress, and it's still absolutely there. And then you look at a sort of situation from another chapter in a book which was looking at the trauma of the Troubles in Belfast. And yes, Belfast as a city looks very, very different in many ways than when it did. But the street names are still there. And that lived memory, even though that population might be completely different, there is a kind of subconscious lived memory of that place that will always know that that particular street corner is associated with that particular event. And it's still absolutely there. I worked also with a group in London who lived on a social housing estate, and there's a group of Afro-Caribbean women, and they were instrumental in setting up the Notting Hill Carnival. And they'd been displaced from Notting Hill, and then the social housing place that they'd lived in then for 30, 40 years, they were also being displaced from that. They go back, some of them have been back to Notting Hill and have said just how traumatic it is. And they feel the absence in a way. They know it's for them personally very traumatic. They love to see the celebration. It is Notting Hill Carnival. Millions of people, going to that place in London and having a huge party over a bank holiday weekend. And it's a huge celebration of culture and some of the best things that it is to be, from this particular country. But they notice the absence of this, and there's the trauma in that for themselves. And now, when I was working with them, they were being split up again and sent all over London. So in a way, that trauma travels with them to where they're going as well, even though on the surface, back in Notting Hill, things might look quite different.
Most systems of urban management, or many, if not most, are systems of control. How we police a place, how we design a place, how we operate in a place is often built for control. What changes when systems are built out of care or compassion rather than control?
Oh, something wonderful happens. Something really wonderful happens. And there's also something when you sort of work to subvert those systems of control or work to the side of it as well. And I work with a lot of projects that are sort of, administrative systems be damned, let's just go and do this anyway. It opens up something which, a term that I've worked with quite a lot, of the radical imagination. And just seeing the absolute possibility that there can be different ways of doing things. And even if you're not working within a system control, society doesn't break down. And actually what you get is a real community of care. And you get this impact on yourself at an individual level, and you get that impact of yourself when you join that different system, that system of care, and that joining of one into the other as well. You feel different agencies within yourself, within your communities. You feel different, deeper connections to yourself, to others, and to your place around you. But I think the most powerful part of it is just being able to actually, I've seen it in different projects at different scales, but just being able to sort of say, a community say, like, we did this, is an immensely powerful thing. But I think at the moment, we do need different ways, different systems of doing things. We have to be thinking about things differently. And something I see particularly in that kind of tactical placemaking is the piloting of small things. Let's just see if it works. Let's just give it a go. And from that, wonderful exponential things can happen as well. But centering care is a real decentering of a sort of a monolithic, patriarchal, white, colonial, Northern European system of, way of doing things. And it taps into things, into knowledges that I think in many of us have either been silenced or completely hidden from us for generations.
Thinking about centering and doing the work of kind of trauma-informed place making and building, what's the relationship what's the risk of centering trauma in a place when you're doing that work, and how do you avoid that? How do you maintain hope and joy as you're building communities that are embedded with trauma?
There's always, you never want to just be talking about the trauma of a place. I've done some work with refugee groups, and there was one instance where I was talking to somebody, and somebody saying, "God, people always want us to talk about our trauma, but I'm more than this trauma. Yeah, it was horrible. I'm going to be different forever. I'm ultimately changed, but I don't just want to talk about the trauma. There's so much more I can bring into where I am right now than my trauma." And I think there's something to be said of this double-sided coin of the trauma and the healing, of sort of taking that trauma-informed approach. I think it's really important that there's a sort of 4-step process of like realizing the pervasive nature of trauma. Brilliant, right? So we can understand it, we can recognize that it's present in a place. And then in recognizing that, we're identifying the trauma responses that we might see in individuals and whole communities across a whole system level as well. But actually what's really important is our response to that. And yes, in some cases, we absolutely have to stay with the trouble. We have to stay with the trauma. But actually there has to be, there's a turning of that dial and a working of that. Not in a kind of, okay, we've talked about then what's next, where do we go with this? But actually adapting our practices as placemakers to really try and support healing rather than just a kind of carrying on regardless. So working in that trauma-informed way, there's a recognition that it's there, it's in the room, it's present, it's not going to go away. But rather than come from a place of react, what's our place of response in this? Which again is something, a terminology again, that comes from a care-centered way of working. And making sure that as we're moving forward, we're not doing anything to re-traumatize, we're not over-dwelling on the trauma. And we're actually really listening to those people that we're working with and where they want to take this as well. The worst thing we can do or the quickest thing we can do to cut down any joy is to not be doing that listening to people and how they want to manage their trauma and how they want to turn around their particular place in relation to that trauma at the same time. And I've been in situations where, in really sort of ostensibly traumatic places, and things have happened to people in those places. But there has been humour there. There has always been hope there. There's always been creativity and imagination there. And there's always been a real resistance to being just defined by that trauma. And that's what you lean into. But I take the lead from others on that. I can bring in my particular skills to it, but I do take my lead from others in that rather than impose, assume, expect, and so forth.
More with Cara Courage after the break. When I first started thinking about soup and placemaking, it started with stone soup. The old fable, the traveler, the pot, the stone, the villagers each contributing a carrot, an onion, a potato, a pinch of salt. A story about co-creation, a story about placemaking. But once the idea was in my head, I started noticing soup everywhere, not just in fables, in churches, in shelters, in community centers, at fundraisers, festivals, around family tables, beside hospital beds. Across cultures and centuries, whenever people seem to be trying to care for one another, soup keeps appearing. There are countless foods that nourish us, countless meals that bring people together. And yet soup occupies a special place in our collective imagination. When communities feed people during times of hardship, we often call them soup kitchens. When someone is sick, we bring soup. When immigrant communities leave home, one of the first things they often carry with them are recipes for soup and stews that remind them where they came from. Soup seems to be as much social technology as it is food, a way of turning individual ingredients into something shared, a way of transforming separate contributions into common experience. Perhaps that's why the story of stone soup endures, not because of the stone, not even because of the soup, but because it speaks to something fundamental about how communities form. Someone provides the vessel, someone creates the conditions, and then people bring what they have: a carrot, an onion, an idea, a skill, a story, a little bit of time, lived experience. And somehow together, those contributions become something larger than any one person could have created alone. A few years ago in Detroit, a woman named Amy Kaherl invited a group of neighbors to meet around bowls of soup and a simple idea. For the price of a meal, community members would hear a handful of proposals for improving the city. Then they would vote. The winning idea would receive the money collected that evening. She called it Detroit Soup, which feels almost too perfect. A community gathering around a common pot, contributing what they can and deciding together what they want to build. Stone soup brought to life. Maybe that's why soup keeps showing up, because soup stretches. More guests are coming? Toss in another potato. Soup welcomes. Soup adapts to whatever ingredients are available. Soup asks us to slow down, to sit together, to share, to contribute, to belong. We started talking about placemaking and what placemaking is and isn't, and kind of the different disciplines within placemaking. What do you hope placemaking will look like in 5 years? How do you think the field will change, or how would you like to see the field evolve?
Without sounding like a soapbox, I really hope that awareness of trauma is more, is embedded in our practice. And I actually think placemaking right now, no doubt terms of placemaking will change again in the next 5 years. What I would really like to see is there is really exciting deconstructing and reconstructing placemaking work happening in non-Anglophile parts of the world. I would love to see regard, respect, acknowledgement, and learning from those practices brought into the dominant placemaking practice. I think that's really important. And off the back of that, I think as placemaking develops and as it works in more complex and complicated places, and as it's interacting with all sorts of different systems and structures, and more is being asked of it, more is being said of it, more is being co-opted of it, I think we're at a real ethical turn in placemaking right now. So I think there's this constructive term. And actually what I want for placemaking is we need to really specify our ethics and our praxis and not think about this as just like, I'm doing a placemaking project. Actually, no, you're a practitioner of this particular field. So there's and seeing justice at the core of placemaking, not just at the margins. And a real healthy critique of this as a really plural and situated practice. The ecological and the more than human, the non-human have to come into this as well, more than they are. And I think there's something here in terms of how we value and therefore how we measure placemaking that also has to change. So rather than just looking at metrics alone, we're beginning to look at this larger piece, which is around the relationality of placemaking, about belonging and trust and memory. And those are part of our value system of how we're understanding placemaking, how we're evaluating and how we're measuring it.
Talk more about the global context. What could we be learning if we look in, like, for example, the global south or other places in the world?
There's these were terms which I saw people using so over 2 years I was looking at who's saying what, who's doing what. And there were different situated logics of placemaking that I was finding as really quite intentional practices. So one was a decolonial placemaking, so really reclaiming Indigenous and erased spatial knowledges. Another one was a placemaking which was emancipatory, so building a collective agency through everyday civic practice. There's a huge vernacular placemaking, which I think in I can see kind of put to the margins in a lot of practices here, but that comes out of really informal cultural and ritual knowledges and exchanges as well. There's a lot of placemaking of survival, where people themselves become this organising force when other structures aren't there around them. There's a huge amount of memory-based placemaking that I was seeing in this non-Anglophile work. So, and a lot of that was around restoring wounded or erased histories of places, and a completely different way to networking as placemaking as well, and a kind of trans-local solidarity and knowledge sharing done in ways that I think are very different to, a normative practice of placemaking that I would see. Now, I'm not saying that any of the projects and things that I was looking at were calling themselves that. I'm not saying that these are definitive terms either. But these were kind of as a thematic look. This is what I was seeing coming up. And of course, we can see all of that in different placemaking projects in the States, in the UK, Australia as well. But it can happen very much at the margin still. And these were the kind of practices that I was seeing as being really centred, and a very, very different kind of placemaking to what you would see normally.
Mm. What didn't I ask you that I should have asked you? What should we have talked about that we didn't touch on?
There is something in this term of placemaking. Like, I love that we are asking, 50 years on, the kind of thing from that first term, what is placemaking? I love that we're holding placemaking to account like this. And I think we just need to get much better as placemakers to sit in this really ambivalent place where it can mean so many things and things that are seemingly contradictory. And I think that's such a rich space to work and to play in. But it ultimately is what's going to keep us on our toes as practitioners and keep us accountable to ourselves and those that we're working with as well. And so while some people I know really struggle with a particular term or everything, I'm like, this is great. Who's saying what now? Because this is absolutely, as a relatively young practice and sector, this is really what we need to be doing. But of course, I say that with my own kind of contradictoriness, because if it hasn't got the community front and centre of it, I can't call a practice placemaking. So it's all there, it's all there in the mix.
You talk about it, kind of 50 years in from, the origins of what we understand as placemaking. And there are some principles that have remained constant in that. And it's very dynamic. Place is dynamic. Cities are dynamic. People are dynamic. So a lot of the things, William White wasn't talking about cell phones, right? For example, the world changes. It's very dynamic. Places are dynamic, and histories are dynamic, and our understanding of it is. So I think it's important that we don't land on this is what placemaking is, but we continue to have that conversation because it should be dynamic. It should evolve as we do.
Absolutely. And for me, when I go in and work in a place, the thing that I carry from one project to another is my own set of ethics that I work to. I don't carry assumptions from one place to another. And I can bring in learning from one place into another and just throw that into the pot. But everywhere I work is completely different. And I work in neighbourhoods. I don't work with homogenous communities. So at the absolute micro level of this work, we're talking about difference all the time. And we're talking about differences of opinion and differences of purviews and experiences of places. Is such a dynamic field. So at the macro, when we're having these conversations around semantics of placemaking and how it engages with structures of powers and things as well, we've got to be just as agile and dynamic at the same time.
How has your set of ethics changed or evolved? And you say you bring that's the constant for you. Has that changed in your?
It has. I would hope it's got more nuanced, and certainly engaging in a trauma-informed awareness has absolutely upped my game on my particular ethics. I think there is something also coming as I've been freelance all my life, but there comes something with a bit of maturity. Like I'm as old as the placemaking term, that I can feel more confident to go, actually, this project I will work in, but that one I won't. And so I know where my particular line is. And there are some times when I have to really have that conversation with myself. It's like, I'm being asked to do this thing by this amazing group, but the setting or the money I'm not particularly on board with. So actually, what does that mean for me? Which wins out in the end? And of course, I can't, whereas before, in a way, I think I was probably a little bit more binary in my thinking. Not all developers are bad. I've worked with some incredible developers, and I've also taken some developers on really interesting journeys and made them placemakers through it. And who knew that would happen at the end of that? So I think my ethics have definitely become more nuanced and less rigid. We can't have rigid in this practice, as we've said, and I think probably a little bit more. The community is always front and center, absolutely. But I'm also interested in, there are lots of different actors within this field. So what's the impact I can have on them by working with them?
Can I ask, going back, how did you get into that? What's your origin story for getting into placemaking and discovering this world?
I think like most placemakers, I just kind of fell into it. I did anthropology as my first degree because essentially I'm really nosy. Like, why do people do that thing that way? Why do they arrange their towns like this? And so on and so forth. But there's like 3 jobs as an anthropologist when you leave uni, and I wasn't one of them. And I live and work in Brighton in the UK. It's a cross between San Francisco and Portland as a very shorthand to help people understand it. But it's full of creative people. And I started working with artist friends of mine. And that got me working with artists, with communities. And about 10 years into that, there was this sort of little light bulb moment when I heard that term placemaking. I was like, that's what I do. That's it. That's it. And then that was it. And then I went back and did a master's and a PhD on placemaking, essentially.
My recent exploration of soup led me down a number of delicious paths. In particular, I met 2 dedicated community builders in 2 cities and heard 2 inspiring stories about 2 beautiful programs and many, many bowls of soup.
Yeah, so my name's Cristin Cooper, and I am a soup maker and pastor in Brookville, Maryland. I'm about a little under an hour away from Washington, D.C.
My name is Amy Kaherl. I was the founder and director of Detroit Soup, a micro-granting dinner that funded projects looking to make the city better.
I've been making soup, what I call a business and a ministry. I've been doing soup since 2019 is when I officially kind of started Coop Soups. So I've been at this using soup as a tool to build community for a while now.
So people would have 4 minutes to 4 people would have 4 minutes to share their idea. 4 questions from the diners. The diners who would come would give $5 at the door, and then they would eat over a collected meal, share, and vote on what project they thought would best benefit from the money.
I took stock of my friendships, my relationships, and I just felt I had friends, but a lot of the friendships felt shallow. They felt performative. And I just started to ask this question of how can I slow down and build relationships of depth and honesty? And I started to answer that question by sharing literal soup with my literal neighbors, the people right next door to me and across the street from me.
And even then, when I did it, I had only been living here for like a year. But how else do you get involved? But you dive in. I don't know. I guess I wanted to know my neighbors. I wanted to and even that, I don't think I did. I guess those who are willing to participate and wanted to get involved in something, those are the ones who came out,
And eventually these neighbors started to become my friends. And so in the fall, it's cold where I live. And so my husband and I, we opened up our home once a week in the fall. to share soup and bread. It was a bit of a potluck. We said, we'll provide the soup and you bring the other foods with you.
Offering people the idea of eating, like sitting around over a bowl of food, clicks because it's natural. Usually we would get like a pot of soup and that could feed like 60 people. And then it grew to about like 300 people. And so we relied on the generosity of community members as like a community potluck to help feed. And so we if you brought food, you could share anything for up to 60 seconds with the fellow diners.
We were also exploring what did it look like to have church around a dinner table. So when I say building community around the table or intimate community, we also kind of wanted to play around with the whole time that we're around the table being an experience of communion, an experience of grace, an experience of encountering, I'm a Christian, so this is Christian language, but encountering God's grace and growing in deeper intimacy with God's love. And so we wanted to explore what did that look like around the table. And the people that were coming said, this soup is really good. Have you ever thought about selling it? And you should. I decided to look into it because I was about to have my last semester of seminary, and I was feeling called to pastoral ministry, but not feeling like the pastoral ministry where you like wear the robe and your office is in your church building and there's a steeple and the altar and you're in front of the people and the people are sitting and you're standing, all that. None of that felt like the right fit for me. But I was really able to identify that pastoral ministry still felt like a good fit. It just was going to look different. And so I thought, okay, well, I am actually going to look into this, starting a soup business that reflected this slowing down, this using using soup as a tool to build community. And I'm a Christian, so I'm going to do this with that purpose or that motivation. But we're really going to allow soup to be the tool. And kind of once the customer has it, it's up to them how they're going to kind of use it. And so, yeah, as a tool for empathy, compassion, building community, seeing your neighbor, loving your neighbor, all of that. And really from there, it kind of just took off. Like it was just kind of, okay, if we're going to start a soup business and it's going to be about community building, then we have to locally source our soup's vegetables to connect people to their neighborhood farmer. We need to, on our soup label, we need to have conversation starters that encourage conversation around the table and all these other kind of business decisions that kind of went into it. But the origin really was, I'm in my apartment sharing soup. People are like, the soup's really good. You should think about selling it.
It was fun just to do something. And it was so deeply imperfect. What a gift. Our tables were sitting on the floor around a piece of old doors that we got at Architectural Salvage. So I think that in itself is really beautiful. You know, it was a joy to be at the beginning stages of so many beautiful ideas. And we get precious about ideas, and we get precious about perfection, and we get precious about outcomes, and we get precious about data. Who gives a shit? Talk about it. Get dirty. Get weird. Get in it. Just do it. It was about what people saw, how they could interact, what they felt like a $500 could help do. None of this was my money. None of this was Soup's money. It was literally put into a pot, a giant soup pot, and people entrusted us with voting or the tally at the end of the day and wherever the money went. But the money was the least interesting thing that got exchanged. It was connections and community and access to resources and knowledge and volunteerism. And, I can't tell you the data of it. Again, it doesn't matter. But what was happening in the first couple of years that it was people just being like, wow, there's a sense of community here that I don't see in other places. People getting involved, people trying things, people getting weird about stuff. And so people moved here because of Soup. People bought houses because of Soup. People got friend groups because of Soup. A couple got married because they met at Soup. What is community more than that?
How did I get there? So I got there a convergence of things. So one way I got there really was my own loneliness. Again, my own question of how do I build relationships of depth and honesty? So I think one part was, again, I was lonely. I was experiencing loneliness and I wanted to solve for my own loneliness. And so I love to cook. I love to make soup. It was honestly the first time I went. So I didn't know my neighbors at all. Nobody knew. This is something I learned. Nobody really knew each other. So it was winter of 2018, and I had some leftover red velvet cupcakes from a birthday party I had gone to the night before. And I heard some kids playing outside and their moms were there. And I just thought, and again, I didn't have soup in my, I wasn't thinking about soup. I was just thinking about neighboring at the time. And I had these cupcakes and I thought, I'm just going to go share these cupcakes and see what happens. And so I went downstairs and I brought out the cupcakes and the kids and the moms were so receptive. I'm like, my name's Cristin. I have these cupcakes. And there was like no skepticism, no nervousness, no. And I just, in that moment, I literally I spent like an hour outside eating cupcakes, talking to the moms, talking to the kids. I went upstairs and I told my husband, I just said, that was so easy. That the story I'm telling myself that people, it's leftover cupcakes, which I just told them. I was honest. Oh, you can't share your all the stories I would tell myself, you can't share your leftovers. Parents don't want their kids to have sugar. You don't know, you don't know these people. You don't know if they're gonna, and so, so all that existed, but I was just I'm gonna go do this. And I always tell myself to this day, I just say, the worst they could say is no. Everything's fine. The worst they could do is not open their door. The worst they could do is say, no, we don't want the cupcakes. The worst they could do is never roll down their window. That's actually not a huge cost. And so that was a big, so that moment is so memorable to me because it just was okay, this worked. I took leftover cupcakes. Nobody was afraid of the leftovers. Nobody cared that it was sugar at 3 p.m. And everybody was really warm and friendly.
You come as you are. You don't have to dress up. You don't have to perform. Come as you are. Come in a suit if that makes you happy. Come in shorts and a t-shirt. It's never about getting it right. It's about being present in the moment. And that's all it was, giving an opportunity. And usually, if you're able to communicate what you needed to get to the next step, every single person who pitched would get what they need. Who needed the money usually would get the money. If you needed resources or connection or how to problem solve or get a graphic designer, or what a gift. And bread is a gift, and it's messy, and it's gorgeous, and it's awesome, and it's stupid, and it's part of America, and it's not part of it. It's its own thing at the same time. It's part of Michigan. People are afraid of the place. People are empowered by the place. What a gift. This place is incredible.
I knock on another neighbor's door and he answers and I explain, I've lived in this neighborhood for, I think 3 years at that point. I tell him where I live and I just say I just want to get to know my neighbors. And he said, thank you so much for knocking on our door. We have lived here for 11 years. When we first moved in, we wanted to meet our neighbors, but we just didn't have the time. And then he literally said, I thought too much time had passed and it would be embarrassing to now go knock on someone's door. So I just never did. Thank you for doing that. And that again is so memorable to me of there's no such thing as too much time has passed. People are, again, not everybody, but majority of people are delighted that you knocked on their door and that you said hello and that you just said, and again, that was it, some bread. And all I said is, I just want to meet my neighbors. It wasn't there was nothing else. So it just kind of happened. And then I think when the fall hit, it felt like a no-brainer of soup, warm, comforting, easy to add to. If somebody brings a friend, you just open one more can of white beans and put that in. The soup was easy to make vegan and gluten-free. Soup is really, really lends itself to I can make this dairy-free, I can make this meat-free. And so that was also a huge part of I can have an entire meal that's nutritious and it can be vegan and gluten-free so anyone can eat it. people have like their chicken noodle stories and like whose recipe in their family. People have opinions. And when I say opinions, I also mean like stories, memories that, again, I think like do make it more conducive to community building. People have memories and stories and opinions about chicken noodle, about tomato basil, cultural, like you hear different different cultures saying like we put cinnamon in soup, or this lentil with this spice, coconut milk, like I hear all the time like opinions on coconut milks, like the people that I know that are from the Caribbean have their favorite coconut milk, people that are from India have their favorite, like these are my friends. So it's, yeah, I think I think soup has really lent itself to, has been really conducive to storytelling. And I think in the storytelling, there's a lot of power in the connections that are built in those moments. I think intimacy scales in storytelling. I think when we build relationships of depth and honesty, and I would say like where there's depth and honesty, there's intimacy. And then you tell that story. It's inspiring. And I think this is where my hope is, or a huge part of where my hope is. I think that people are moved to neighbor more genuinely because they heard a story that's inspiring. So I think intimacy scales in this storytelling.
Cristin Cooper is the founder of Coop Soup in Brookvale, Maryland. Amy Kaherl is the former founder and director of Detroit Soup and is currently a bartender, DJ, and citizen of the great city of Detroit. I reached out to Amy and Cristin because I wanted to talk about soup, and I ended up having a delightful and meaningful conversations about a range of things, including third place, democracy, neighboring, loneliness, the imperfection of community building, and of course, Detroit. It seems that that's one of the magical powers of sharing food. We come together to share a bowl and ultimately share much more. Earlier this year, I spoke with Evan Weissman, founder of Warm Cookies of the Revolution. One of the things that Evan said that has stuck with me, which I shared with Cara Courage, is the idea that hosting a dinner party is a significant act of resistance.
Massively. And I do a lot of food in my placemaking work. That's a big attraction. But it becomes this relational object, and you can talk about all sorts of things as you're passing a plate or the salt and pepper from one to the other, literally as simple as that. And you can then talk about things really, really directly as well. But yeah, I mean, I've been, we did a local pizza oven thing back in the summer, and it was a kind of pop-up. And it was beautiful and enjoyable and great. And I've done so many of those before. There was something about this one, though, that felt really different. It felt like it had a different weight going into it because of the politics that we're in the place that I was in, which is a really divided town. But everybody came together and it was okay. Which, there was a bit of holding our breath. Who's going to turn up to this? What might happen? What debate, argument, whatever might start to happen? But actually it was okay. And we were able to talk across all the issues of the town. And there wasn't agreement, but there wasn't a huge upset either at the same time. But yeah, it felt like more than ever before, it felt like a really radical act to do that. So many stories come up about food. And stories which, everybody can find, not everybody, but there's a lot of commonality in our experiences of food, the memories of grandparents' houses and the food that they had and so on and so forth. And that
ritual.
And the ritual of it, absolutely. And that cuts across cultures and ages and political divisions. And it can be a really great way to hold those spaces that can be potentially very contested.
Yeah, that's as diverse and different as people we are. Everybody eats, right? Yeah. Everybody has that in common.
Absolutely. And,
so that's
if
beautiful.
Your rituals around food are different,
right?
When you're sat at the table, it doesn't become something that you're going to be offended by. It's like, oh, so what do you do then? It becomes this point of interest.
Right.
and quite genuine and open interest. And there we go. We're off in our conversation.
This is fantastic. This was really great. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and expertise. Thank you for being part of the Sidewalk Ballet here.
No, thank you. You've had some brilliant people on. I can't believe it's only been going since November, because it seems like it's almost like it's always been there. I think the work that you do with this, the conversations you have, are really important for our sector. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
Dr. Cara Courage is a global placemaking leader, cultural and creative sector consultant, director, and researcher. Her passion for and dedication to people in place has led her to specialize in practices that are socially engaged, community-led, and embedded in place, whether that place be a team, a city park, a national museum, or a rural town high street. Her most recent project is Trauma-Informed Placemaking with Dr. Anita McEwen. Sidewalk Ballet is a production of Big Creative Consulting, strengthening community through culture and place. To learn more about the work we do or to start a big creative conversation, visit bigcreativeconsulting.com. Mastering by Ryan Musante. Our theme song and original music is by the Coop Project. I'm Chip.
Here's what I'll say. I never got to eat it because as a good leader, you eat last. And so my favorite was me and my volunteers would order Domino's pizza because it was the only thing open on a Sunday night. So that was my favorite soup.
I'll see you downtown.